Thank you very much for coming, and a quick thank you to our sponsors for their support of this event. And I'm going to hand it over to the MC, Norma Treese.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Listen, it's also my great honor to welcome you here on behalf of the International Superyacht Society. We're almost 30 years of bringing together the business of yachting, educational components, and events all over the world, and we're really thrilled to have these two parts of the leadership series here today. And of course, I have to say, afterwards, you're more than welcome to come upstairs, buy a ticket, and join us for the members' reception if you want to rub elbows with some of the most important people in the business of yachting. But first of all, we have here two seminars. The first one is where we are right now, which is Smart Bridges, Now to Next Navigation. And we have not only our fantastic sponsors and speakers from Intellian, the lovely Melissa Orlick. Or Melissa, do you have a new name now that you've gotten married? Melissa Hansley. Congratulations on that. She just finished her honeymoon before coming here. And we have Corey Ranslem, who is the fantastic CEO of Dryad Global. If you don't know what they do yet, you need to understand, because they are absolute leaders in technology in yachting. And we have David Gratton from Telemar, who unfortunately is lost in transit, as it seems a lot of people are, because the yacht club doesn't seem to understand which ballroom everybody is in. And very recently to the business of yachting, but not to the technology of yachting, is Mintra, and they're going to be our very last speakers and tell us about the exciting new things that they are doing. So I'm going to be out in the audience taking any questions that you have from everybody, and I'd just like to say again, merci beaucoup d'être venu. Thank you so much for coming today on behalf of the International Superyacht Society, the Education Committee, and the entire Board of Directors. And now I'm going to turn it over to none other than Corey Ranslem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Norma, and thank you all for taking time. I know Monaco is busy, a lot of running around, so we appreciate the time that you guys are spending with us today on this seminar. How we would like to work it is that we're going to go through some of the high points that we have, and David, like Norma said, will be joining us here shortly. And then from there, we have a little special guest speaker who's going to come up and talk a little bit about what they do. That's our sponsor, Mintra. Thank you for being a sponsor of this program. And what they do fits very much into what we're talking about with Smart Bridges, kind of now to next navigation. And then we'll jump into questions. So as we go through this, make sure you write down your questions and keep that. And then we'll get to those at the end of the program. And then again, if you can, stay around for the next seminar, Mergers and Acquisitions, which is going to be an awesome seminar. I'd also like to thank the team at ISS for doing a great job of putting this together. I've been involved in a number of the educational series seminars on this side and the other side of the pond, and it's great to see the different topics that ISS is bringing together for the members and for the industry. Before we jump into this, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background on how this seminar series of the Smart Bridges started. It actually started over 10 years ago when the industry was looking at moving from primary navigation on paper into digital, into ECDIS, and what does this look like in the compliance. And the seminar series was actually started with Blue Water Books and Charts and Intellian on looking at what was next for hardware and software for navigation. The seminar had evolved over a few years, and my company joined the fray to talk about information, cybersecurity, and then into the regulatory compliance. And now this is our third kind of generation of this seminar, where we brought in the partners from Intellian to add what we think now, as we look at the future with navigation, with smart bridges, with what's happening, is the communication piece. That's becoming even more and more important as we're looking at the connected vessel, the connected bridge, what AI looks like, cyber, and how we protect that. So it's been a very interesting evolution through this, what we've seen, and not just in the large yacht yacht industry. We've seen the cargo and the cruise industry kind of go through an evolution of what that next smart bridge looks like and some of the technology that's out there. So we're going to kind of talk through some of these points this afternoon from our perspectives. And again, when David gets here, he'll join us on the panel. And like I said, make sure you, if you have questions at the end of the seminar, we'll be getting to hopefully a fairly interactive question and answer session. So we want to start out talking about the regulatory side of it, because when you talk about the navigation piece, there's always a regulatory compliance piece to that. So we deal a lot with that on the cyber side. As we know that there's the IMO 2021 regulations that have come out that are now in force with flag state, various port state control. From our discussions with the U.S. Coast Guard, we believe that there's going to be more regulations specific to cyber that are going to come out for the maritime industry. For compliance specifically. Again, a lot of this is SOLAS class vessels, but some of this does come down into the large yacht side when you look at port state control. So I think we're at the very beginning from the cyber piece of the regulatory compliance and what's happening from the regulatory standpoint. Now, when we get into the communication piece, there's a whole bunch on the regulation.
Yeah, so for right now, our systems on the Intellian side are all GMDSS ready, for example, but with Inmarsat and Iridium, they need to go through their processes with the IMO to get those certified in order for those systems to then be equipped and approved on that end to go forward.
So that's pretty interesting, and I don't think people realize, like, even with the other satellite companies that are coming in, there's a number of them now with the LEO and MEO constellations that you can't just jump right into some of the regulatory stuff when it gets into the GMDSS.
Correct. So they go through a number of steps on their end. Again, we partner with Inmarsat and Iridium and work alongside them through the IMO process, the type approval, and everything that they need. So all of those steps have to be taken before you can actually just sign up and have service right away.
So it's not just, oh, here you go.
It's not turn on, turn off.
Anything when you deal with regulatory compliance in the IMO is like that. So from the standpoint of, let's talk a little bit about when we look at the connected bridge, about where things are happening with that, and what do you guys see from the communication standpoint when you look, let's look a little bit now kind of past the regulatory piece and what that looks like, from the communications piece, and how important, from what you guys are doing as you see that, as we're looking at, the geostationary and the MEO and the LEO, how is all of this going to work together?
Yeah, so I think everyone's been obviously the talk of the town on Starlink, and we know that they're a LEO constellation. There's more coming out though, right? We've got OneWeb, you've got other providers like Telesat, you've got Amazon Kuiper that's coming out. For the MEO side, you've got SES with their mPower solution, and then a few other companies that are going to be coming out. So no longer you're having just geostationary out there, which was always our legacy, true to be VSAT connectivity. You're going to have other players in the market, and what from our side we're starting to see is that you're no longer having just one provider on board. You're not just having cellular, you're not just having Starlink, you're going across everything. For one, there's not enough data that people can have on board, so they're going to have a geostationary for always their legacy and probably any type of private or secure connection always going through because it's always reliable on that end. You then may have something like Starlink on board where you're going to get the bandwidth, but you have no committed information rate. So it's going to work when it does, and it might not work when it doesn't. And then you'll also have the MEO, which is that mid-Earth orbit on that end, which you're still going to get the large capacity and heavy bandwidth there, but it's just another piece of the puzzle. And then from there, you'll then break into anything on the cellular, shore Wi-Fi, and so forth on that end. So what we're seeing is that they're going to have everything on board. It's no longer just going to be one sole provider for everything.
Which is really interesting, because if you look back, say 5 to 7 years ago, or even 10 when we first started this, there was a couple of main providers, very limited bandwidth, very limited access to what crew could do on board, whether it was operational or for personal. But we're seeing a huge revolution right now in the communication space.
Yep, and I think even so for the, sort of bridge side of things, for the safety side. So with Inmarsat and Iridium, still waiting for the fleet broadband on the Inmarsat side and the Certus terminals on the Iridium side. Once those are implemented through the IMO and the GMDSS side, you'll be able to achieve higher bandwidth rates, so you'll start to implement more digitalization for the bridge. So GPS pointing, security camera systems, things of that sort, so you can start doing pinpointing more for those communications.
Which is interesting when you look at, kind of from the bridge, and this is something that I know David will get into when he gets here, but from the bridge navigation side, that's really changing when you're looking at the major hydrographic offices in the world that are going from paper into digital, and our company does work in the cargo space, the cruise and the large yacht, and it's really easy when you look at the cargo and the cruise space. Everybody has ECDIS, everybody's been paperless for a long time. There is still some paper backup, but what the interesting piece is the large yachts kind of fall in between that piece, where you have some that are pleasure that may not have the ability for the ECDIS, and then some that have ECDIS. And I know when we have Mintra come up towards the end of our panel, are going to talk a little bit about that, and I think it's something that's really unique. And the hardware, as David's coming up, our third panelist, welcome David, we're glad you're here. This is David from Telemar, and we just started talking, David, a little bit on the communication piece from that. And we gave a little bit of background on the seminar and where we're at. One of the things, and I think it would be great for you to jump into, is, on the bridge side of it, the hardware piece, from the large yacht perspective, what's happening with that, and where are we from that standpoint, where we've been and kind of where we're going. It's great. You just sit down and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to ask you a very complicated question.
That's a really big question.
Don't even get a chance to drink the water. I know you've been wandering around trying to get over here, but no, we're jumping right into it.
And apologize, everybody. It was a 31-hour travel day yesterday. I'm a little frazzled. So you asked about the bridge.
The bridge, and so we've just talked about the communication, connectivity, and some of the regulatory compliance. What does that look like, from the hardware perspective, and what's happening on that side of it?
Yeah, and I think the easiest way to answer that is to talk about what we talked about in forming this panel. There's a lot of regulations out there, and they're relatively hard to keep track of for almost anyone. And every one of those regulations has, in general, for communications and navigation, has generated a carriage requirement for equipment. And that all varies by flag state, by class, by gross tonnage, et cetera. And then, as soon as you have the equipment on board, you also need a subscription for the service, so that you have, I actually have a vessel right now that's trying to do a commissioning. They haven't signed up for any of their services yet, but they want all their paperwork done. So, well, as soon as you sign up for services, then we can fill out the paperwork, and then we can go ahead and do it. Between Inmarsat C, LRIT, the L40, the 4300 L-band systems, which is Iridium Certus, there's a fair amount of hardware that's required and has to be there, and that's what the surveyors and the inspectors want to see. And knowing exactly what you need to have on board is it's not exactly a black art, but it's closer than it should be. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think we're going to dive into this as we progress through the seminar a little bit more. As you see, the complexity of bridge equipment requirements, cybersecurity are continuing to increase. We're not going to roll any of this stuff back. This is going to continue to increase. So with that, the other piece, besides the regulatory compliance that we have from the cyber, from the information, from the navigation, the communication side, well, what we look at there is now you're starting to overwhelm bridge crews and yacht crews on the number of devices that they have to manage, they have to maintain, the expertise. So the next piece, that I think we want to roll into is to talk about, okay, when you have the regulatory compliance, you have all of these different things that you have to, take care of. Now we're into the subscription piece, and what does that look like, from you guys' perspective, to be able to say, okay, well, now we have this bigger piece of trying to manage the subscriptions for all of these different pieces pieces of equipment, whether it's the satellite, whether it's the nav and updating that, the cyber, or whatever that is. So now, let's roll into and talk a little bit about the subscription piece.
Sure. So from our side, since we are the hardware manufacturer, we have just the equipment side of it. So we have to rely on our partners, whether that's Telemar, whether that's a marine electronics company. We're all partnered with quite a few out there. Those companies then would be able to provide you with either the SIM card if you're looking at an Iridium or a fleet broadband type system, or signing you up for a subscription service if it's through the VSAT end of things. So from our perspective, we can help you get to that part of, okay, the system's online and it's working, but you have to have a subscription plan for the data to actually process forward. So typically, in just an example of what we tend to see when we get troubleshooting calls is that they call in and say, the system's not online, it's not working, nothing's going through. Well, similar to your point, David, is the fact that, well, you never signed up for a plan, you never activated that account, so it's not going to send any data through, so you kind of need a chicken before the egg type thing.
Yeah, you can't test it. Interestingly, and this is not a pitch, but I was just talking to we're owned by Marlink, which does nothing but airtime and VSATs and IT. And I was just talking to the guy who runs the UK office, and they've developed a managed services plan. And he hands me the sheet, and I'm looking at it, and I'm going, okay, but this is all tech jargon. Why does somebody want this? Well, they have their email subscriptions they have to pay for. They have their licensing subscriptions they have to pay for. They have, sometimes there's a connectivity charge, not airtime, a connectivity charge they have to pay for. And this is for multiple devices on the vessel. And one of the things that they're aiming for with the managed service plan is to say, you write one check, there's one bill, we itemize it, we carry the services for you that you want us to carry, and that's directly in response to it being such a tedious task. I've actually asked them to put together a case study. Okay, how many bills and emails and services can you get rid of by putting this managed services contract in place? I say, yeah, it's a good idea. It's over 15. I'm like, okay, good. That's what we want to talk to people about. So.
Well, and it's amazing when you look at it, the number, everything, as everybody knows, you can't buy or do anything without a subscription. You download the app, now I gotta pay the subscription. And that's true, whether you're looking at, okay, I have the hardware, whether it's Ectus or if I'm using Time Zero or whatever that may be, that, the entry point is just the hardware. After that, now I have to get a subscription to be able to get the charts. And even if you're still kind of in the printed chart world, there's still theoretically a subscription to that, because now every so often you're making chart corrections, but at a certain point now you just get a new chart printed. So it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. But when you start to look at, the vessel of the future, how many, literally hundreds of subscriptions will have to be managed for the vessels when it comes to whether it's communication, whether it's cyber, whether it's intelligence and information, navigation. That's not even getting into the engine room side of it and the engineering piece and the number of subscriptions. And now, I want to be able to get this data off the boat. There's another subscription. So as we go forward, that hopefully will be something to be able to look at, is how do we pull these subscriptions together in a much more manageable plan.
So just to tap on that, I think similar to what you were saying, David, I think that's something that for those out there that are on board the vessels or on the yacht management side, you should be asking your service providers, you should be asking the marine electronics companies, can you put this all on one bill for me, right? Maybe it can be itemized out, which might help you on that end, but at least it's on one flat bill, it's through one company, you have one point of contact which you can then go to for all the communications. I know in my past it was a nightmare when you were trying to deal with 4 different companies running 6 different types of antennas and equipment systems on board, and you had no idea which bill was going where, and it just kind of got convoluted, and you'd start calling the wrong companies, not knowing who was actually running what on board.
Yeah, and actually, as I was having to follow up on what you just said, the conversation that I was having about the managed services, they said, Curio is the most widely used connectivity firewall appliance, and all of the ship's networks run through there. And if your subscription goes past the due date and you didn't know to renew it, it turns into a brick and your network shut down. as far as all the communications that are going through there. And that's a simple mistake to make. You change somebody in the accounting office, they didn't know how important it was. They say, hey, what's this $400 a month charge? I don't know that we want to do this. And in the meantime, the ship goes dark for comms. It's just not something, it's too easy to happen. It's too big a vulnerability.
So we've talked regulation, we've talked subscriptions, which are both very exciting topics. Now we're going to get into, start to push into the future side, and on that point, on the connectivity side of it. So we have, these regulations, and through that we have to have certain equipment, and through that equipment we have to have subscriptions to manage and maintain all of this. And then from there, now the connectivity piece. Because again, speaking from our experience, the large yacht industry is extremely unique. Is our cruise customers and our commercial customers typically are on satellite and stay on satellite. They don't shift to cellular, they don't shift to Wi-Fi, they are on satellite 24/7. But the uniqueness on the communication and connectivity with the large yacht is there's the potential that you're switching almost in real time between sometimes 3 or 4 different networks.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think that's what we're seeing, kind of a touch from what I was before, is that we're continuing to see the larger yachts kind of fall into that, mindset where it's like, okay, when I'm close to shore, we'll use cellular. When I'm farther out, I'll switch between the VSAT and Starlink. I'll switch between shore Wi-Fi. So again, it's just that continuous need for more and more data. We'll start to see networks being split across the board where you'll have the owner maybe be on the highest rate plan that you can be on, all the guests then will be separated downward and so forth from there as it's prioritized through. So I think it's that juggling of the different subscriptions, again, going back to that, can be challenging.
So let me ask you a question. I'm going to put you on the spot. I love to do this. So are there providers out there that you can go to and say, hey, we want to bundle all of this together and be able to, pull this whole kind of communication piece, into one pile and pull, whether it's cellular, whether it's the Wi-Fi, the satellite, whatever, into one kind of bucket?
There's a number of providers out there that are doing that, and it's just, that's the questions that you have to ask whoever your services are with. Can I bundle all this together? Can I make it easier for our bookkeepers or procurement or whoever's on there doing that? Is how can I put this all on one bill?
And I think the hardest part about that is what's the definition of all of this, right? And that's going to change for everybody. So know what you need, and if you don't know what you need, find out or contact somebody that can help you understand what you need, and then go find who can provide a one-stop shop for it.
Yeah, and I think that's a very important point, because the communication landscape and the connectivity of the yacht, of the bridge, of the engineering space has changed so much and will continue to evolve. I mean, we haven't even started to talk about what artificial intelligence looks like, and as we start to potentially apply that, to different systems on board, and really what the yacht of the future looks like. And communication and connectivity is going to be a key part to that, and AI is going to play a part in that, to make that decision to say, here's where the data needs to flow based on what the needs of the boat are and at the time, and maybe even hold data back to say, it's not important that this data moves now, that it will be able to make those decisions based on what the parameters are set about how data moves back and forth and when it moves.
Yeah, very true. And I think the only thing that isn't going to change, though, is that regulations are going to continue to be there. They're going to continue to be relatively arcane as far as exactly how they get deployed. And then it's always going to be, it's not quite case by case, but it's closer to case by case than it should be. Theoretically, standards should be developed so that it is easy, everybody can follow the list and everybody can do it, and it's really not that way. And then you get into the peculiarities of the particular surveyor in that particular flag state at that particular time. What does he accept versus what he accepts at a different time?
Hey, Corey, can I ask a, hope not too controversial question?
Please ask it.
In today's age of AI, as opposed to normal human beings, and also in today's age of hacking and ships being taken over, how in the world does it work if your entire systems, navigational systems, are hacked or pirated. How do you deal with that?
That's a very good question. And there's a lot of nuances to that. And I'll start out, but I'm also going to throw over to David as well on this one. But from what we've seen, the biggest part of when you're looking at cybersecurity and critical systems on board, which we would consider navigation as a critical system, is how that data is backed up. You have to start thinking from a vessel perspective, and it's not about, okay, someone's going to hack my boat and take it for a ride. That's possible, but the probability is very low. Right now, we're still seeing the highest number of attacks in the large yacht industry are due to man in the middle, where someone takes over one of the parties' email and diverts funds. We are starting to see that change a little bit, where malware is being launched into systems of large yachts, where those systems are being either ransomed or corrupted. So the first thing that we always advise people is look at what the backups look like. How are your systems backed up, that if the navigation system was corrupted by a cyber incident, how do you bring that back online as quickly as possible? And that's the first thing. Obviously, you want to look at protection and detection, and that's all part of it, is to try to stay out in front of that and have the basics in place, which, as we've seen, the large yacht industry runs the spectrum from complete oblivion all the way to active countermeasures from some of the clients that we've dealt with. So, the detection and protection is step one, but then really look at how can I get my critical systems operational? Because if you pay the ransom, that only opens it up, and again, this is my opinion, there's people that disagree with me, but if you pay the ransom, that just means that you're willing to pay the ransom, and now you're going to be under greater attack. So how do we shut this off and bring, other systems online? And I know you probably want to jump in on that.
Yeah, just actually something, a little bit of a segue to that, but does everybody here is a professional, and they all use email all the time. Do you know the one thing that cannot be protected against? There's only one. Correct. It's exactly what it is. Social engineering is one way that things get hacked, because phishers are relatively sophisticated, and they know if they make that email look good enough, somebody's going to click on the link. And when they do, there's literally nothing that anybody can put in place that will stop that. You can mitigate it quickly if you take all the right steps, but it's the one thing that can't be overcome. And don't forget it. Safe computing is better than malware, is better than hardware, is better than all of it.
AI is going to be a big part of that, and to jump in there, I've been involved in a number of conferences speaking later this week on AI and how that looks and how it's going to affect our industry. And I've given, over the last 4 months, probably 3 or 4 different presentations on specifically AI, and every presentation has been a little bit different. And people say, what does AI look like in the future? And that's the first time, ever I can say, I don't know. AI is changing so rapidly in how things are done right now that we've seen it operating in the cloud. Now we're seeing it move to the device level. And when that happens, AI is learning quickly on just different aspects of day-to-day life, not even navigation, but cyber. There's companies that have AI offense playing AI defense to try to figure out protection schemes, which it scares the hell out of me, because they're advancing the potential of cyber attacks pretty rapidly, ahead of what the protection is. So there's a lot from the AI perspective that's really going to change, and a lot of it that we don't know. One of the things we see with that too is can AI be swayed? And the answer is right now, yes, it can. And it's based on the data that gets inputted. If I don't like the color purple and I'm putting data into AI, my AI is also not going to like the color purple. Eventually, we're going to get past that, and AI will learn past the human input. But where we're at with it right now, it's interesting to see that, yes, this data can actually be biased. And I just want to jump on something that you said, David, was the regulatory compliance. I've spent the last couple of weeks in London at the IMO and having discussions about what does the regulatory compliance look like for the maritime industry when it comes to artificial intelligence. And they are so far behind the knowledge base. And when you have 190 countries that have to agree on what this looks like. It took them, I think, 8 years to get the cyber in place for IMO 2021. They're not even looking at or considering, what the ramifications of AI will be on the future, not just of bridge, but just of vessel operations, and, what's going to be good or bad. And then the human training aspect of it too, is a big part of that. How do we train people for something in the future when we really don't even know what that's going to look like, in the future? So it's really interesting to see, we're talking about kind of next navigation, and if we look even further in the future of what the vessel's going to look like, the connectivity piece is going to be extremely important, not only for protection, navigation, and moving data around, but the vessel of the future is going to be sharing data with other vessels. So you could be going into a port an hour after a cruise ship that's just remapped the bottom with, different types of sonar, remapped with radar, and now that data is going to be shared with your vessel, and you're going to be sharing data with other vessels. This is in the future, but a lot of this is going to be coming rapidly, where we're going to be getting into real-time navigation, and then how does that data and information, feed into ECDIS and feed into, some of the other navigation systems.
We have a question from the audience here.
Yes, just while you were talking about it, just wondering what your thoughts about autonomous bridges. Everybody talking about autonomous cars now, and now when you have 2 or 3 different connections, Starlink, VSAT, everything, and we also know that the human error many times causes accidents, and then you have AI, and if you put all those elements together and a ship crossing the ocean in the future, but maybe one only bridge officer, and you have people on land who get a nice bed to sleep in, they're well rested, there's no fatigue, and what do you think about that future?
Thank you very much for the question. This is a very hotly debated topic in the commercial sector. There's a number of areas in the commercial sector that I've already gone to, autonomous bridges, autonomous shipping for some of the short sea and smaller ferry type operations of what we've seen. It's really interesting to see what's going to happen. I think in the near future, we're always going to have the need for bridge officers as we go through this probably 10 or 15 year, transition from where we are now to what the future looks like, because the systems can still fail. Communication can still drop off over the ocean. So if that happens, I still need someone who's capable to be able to, navigate, run, and operate the ship. But whether we want it to happen or not, the autonomous shipping is going to happen like autonomous cars are. It's probably going to take much longer from the shipping perspective, and it may be something that the vessel is autonomous on an ocean crossing, and then when it gets into certain parameters, there's qualified crew who move that in and out of tight navigation areas or ports. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And then how do you train the crew of the future? You still have to have people who understand how to navigate and drive the vessel, but a lot more into systems engineering side of it is how to manage the computer systems, the IT systems, the cyber systems, and the engineering systems. So, I don't know if you, I don't mean to hog this.
No, I think just to touch
I love tech stuff, so.
I think just to touch on that, I think from our side, so in addition to just the super yacht end of things, on the Intellian side, we're also in the commercial and government type space. And like you said, you have all these connectivities on board, but I think what you see, at least on the government side, that are doing autonomous, they're not only just having different services, right? It's different frequencies as well that they're going to be operated on. So it's the KU frequency, it's the KA frequency, right? So if one goes down, you've got these others. Not only just different satellite links, you may also have military, things of that sort that's on there. So again, it's going back to that same thing. You can't just rely on one single service on board anymore. You have to have multiple links of connectivity.
I think it's not as directly to your question, but follow up on something that you had to say. As I was speaking earlier, there's a 90 meter that we were working on, and the crew changed, and the new ETO and rotation ETO have different viewpoints about how things should be done with the IT systems on board, which is common, right? The best way around that is to design, engineer, and deploy a system that meets all the compliance requirements, but also has an element of control on it, that not just somebody who thinks it should be done differently starts executing changes, because that as more and more autonomous stuff comes in, it needs to be more and more standardized on the connection and the data transfer.
Yeah, and what the regulations are going to look like, nobody knows. That's a really big discussion, is how do you regulate AI? How do you regulate the autonomous shipping, and what's the standard that's put in place? The IMO is talking about that, but it's really up in the air of what that standard is. And unfortunately, from my experience of working with the IMO, what we've seen in the past is the large yacht industry just takes what's given to it because cargo and cruise are at the forefront of making these regulations, and they don't always fit in with large yachts. No, but before we get into questions, what I'd like to do is have our sponsor from Mintra come up, because what these guys do on the training piece, I think, plays very much into what we're talking about, you know, kind of on the smart bridge and the next to navigation side.
Well, you know, what's really interesting about the yacht industry is it only continues to grow, and we're getting closer and closer connections to the commercial world all the time. And this is a great example. Mintra is a company that just acquired another company that a couple of years ago was brand new into yachting, which was called Siebli, and they specialize in electronic training. And now Mintra, which is an even larger company, operating in the commercial and the shipping world, is moving into yachting, and they're very, very specialized in training. So we're extremely pleased to welcome Emanuela here. Thank you for your sponsorship, and thank you very much for your participation, and welcome to the yacht world.
Thank you. I'm Emanuela Colias. I work for the company called Mintra, and basically what we do, you've heard a lot about regulation. We work with regulators to ensure that we have the right training for your crew to make sure you are compliant. And we just ensure safety on board. There was a lot of nice conversation happening, and basically the root cause when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to autonomous shipping, human error is one of the largest risks to vessels. So ensuring that you have competency management systems in place, competency frameworks in place, this is what is going to help avoid these risks.
No, and what I'd like to do is because you guys are big into the training on the ECDIS, on the navigation side, and that's, you know, kind of what we're concentrating on, is to talk a little bit about, from your perspective, where do you see this going in the future when it comes to, you know, what do the bridge crews of the future look like from a training perspective? And, you know, sure, we have to train on navigation and ECDIS and how to use these systems, but what are you guys kind of seeing from the training perspective of where you think this may be going?
Well, working with a lot of the manufacturers for ECDIS, many are doing integrated bridge systems. So all of the systems on board are going to be communicating with each other, so they are going to need to understand pretty much one manufacturer for one full bridge system. The next piece that's actually coming in now, it's the AI piece. And when we talk about vessel efficiency, the AI is coming in to help improve vessel efficiency.
Yeah, which is really
Emanuela,
interesting.
may I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you have...
I was looking for you.
I didn't say
Do you actually have training modules not only on ECDIS, maybe people would be interested to hear about that, but also specifically on AI and how that can affect the vessel operation?
Sure. So one of our legacy products, so I'm a legacy employee from a company called SafeBridge, which only dealt with the manufacturer-approved ECDIS trainings. So we've worked with all the main manufacturers and developed the e-learnings. Now that we're Mintra, we have a lot more on the cybersecurity piece. So when the IMO regulation for 2021 came out, we ensured that we had the cybersecurity training. Because of the relationship that we have with the manufacturers, the ones that have the integrated bridge systems, this is where we're with the AI, this is where we're developing the trainings now. Because it's not like you said, Corey, the IMO is not even thinking about it. So the manufacturers are the ones that are pushing the technology.
Since you're here and you're also representing the ever-increasing crossovers between commercial shipping and yachting, can you make any comments about the differences in navigation and the systems that are used on board yachts as opposed to commercial vessels?
Of course. So a lot of yachting systems is mainly the chart plotters. There's some major manufacturers that actually, like Simrad chart plotter, but even if it's still a navigation system equipment that someone needs to be trained on and how to use. So even if it's a small little system, it's still an integral piece.
If I can jump in there, one of the things in the discussions that we've had on the commercial and the cruise side of it is the most important key to the success of the yacht and the bridge of the future is going to be training, because those requirements are going to be changing so rapidly as we look at cyber, as we look at navigation, as we look at how to use AI properly in all of these systems. That was the one key thing out of our discussions the last couple of weeks on that side of the house has been training. It all got back to training is the most important piece.
Well, and that's why it's so important for the training providers to have that relationship with the regulators.
Yeah.
And the different maritime authorities. For instance, when it comes to autonomous vessels, I'm working with the MCA because that standard is starting to be developed. What is this seafarer going to look like? What is this crew member going to look like? And what kind of training are they actually going to need? So right now, yes, it's probably years and years away, but we are starting to kind of make this transition in the training. It's a focal point.
Right. So I didn't tell you this before, but would you mind staying up here and if people have questions okay.
Not a
So
problem.
we'll jump into the question and answer because I think that's the part of the discussion to get an idea from you guys as the audience of some of the topics. We've just given you kind of a broad overview, a little bit of a look into the future. And if there's hard questions, I'm just going to deflect to everybody else on the panel.
I want to ask another controversial question first. I'm going to
Love
date
you,
myself
Norma.
and tell you when I got my first captain's license, one of the really most important parts of it was that, we had to pass a test on celestial navigation. Are there people here that don't even know what that is? No, don't answer that, please. Can you tell us a little bit about, I always thought of celestial navigation as the ultimate backup to electronic navigation. And as I said, that's not now, maybe that's in the past, but what do you guys think about that? The fact that we're not even training our command staff and our mariners in how to cross oceans on their own if they need to?
I mean, I'll jump in on this. Before I got into the industry side of it, I spent 8 years in the Coast Guard, and the celestial thing was drilled into my head, and it took me 30 minutes going through 2 different books to get a fix, and by then I'm like, oh, we're already past that. It's great for open ocean. I love it. I love the technical stuff like that, but it is interesting. I mean, now there's a digital sextant that you can get, and you can point at a celestial body, star, and it will give you in seconds a very, very accurate position. It's a sextant with a computer tied to it. I'm fascinated by this, and as the backup is, we're losing some of those mariner skills of old, but maybe that's good. I don't know.
Well, I guess as things progress, you start to lose those types of skills. I think the lucky ones who really take an interest in what they're doing will go back and learn from the past. But you're very correct, because when speaking to different companies and P&I clubs and seeing the types of navigational mistakes people are making, and they have this Actus on board, when you hear the stories, it's actually kind of phenomenal. So I do think the basic skills should be taught. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you agree on that. Now,
Yeah.
you just said a couple of dirty words there,
I
at
did,
least
right?
letters. P&I.
I know.
What's the
I know there's insurance people in
viewpoint
the
of all
house. I
that?
won't point you out, but I know they're here. There was a question up here in the front, Norma.
No, but seriously, what do you think the position of insurance companies regarding electronic navigation is?
Well, so there's a few P&I clubs. So there's an event every year. It's called World Actus Day, and there's a lot of P&I clubs that actually come. They're embracing it, but again, it's the companies need to invest in their people and ensure that they have the quality training. Because yes, you could have the ACTIS, right? But if they don't know how to use it, you're not going to do anything with it.
How about, let's go back to another simple question. Why don't you tell us exactly what ECDIS stands for?
Electronic Chart Display Systems.
There you go.
Information systems,
Yes.
thank you.
Well, listen, Matthew Zimmerman back here has been waiting for a second, but we've got another question up front, and then we've got Matthew next.
Keep them coming. I like the game show style.
Good afternoon. Andy Cuff from Computer Network Defense. You've mentioned cybersecurity quite a few times. How do you see that panning out and developing in the coming months and years?
Thank you very much for the question. From my perspective, I think we're going to see major changes in how we do cybersecurity, and the large yacht industry has been about 15 to 20 years behind where we're at in cybersecurity when you look at, hospitals and financial institutions and what they're doing. But I think with what's happening with AI, we're going to leapfrog a lot of that, and we're going to see AI play a bigger part in that. There's a partner that we have that the back end of what we're doing now is actually true AI. A few years ago, you couldn't have said that. It was really machine learning algorithms that were running in the background that people were calling AI. Okay, sure, maybe machine learning is, but it's not like true AI. Machine learning gets us the data to the point of being able to make the decision, but eventually AI is going to surpass that. And I think it's going to be a big part of what the future looks like with cybersecurity, and there's still some unknowns as we're moving from AI in the cloud to AI on device.
But it almost comes back to your celestial navigation, where you become too reliant on it, and you still, in my opinion, need to fall back onto that human element of being able to spot the bad things, because you can train AI and machine learning.
I totally agree, and I think it's going to be a while before AI is going to be able to get to the part of the human decision making. It'll eventually get there, but I think you're right that the human piece and being able to train people on recognizing these behaviors in systems is going to be extremely important. And across the board, I think the human training, no matter where AI goes, not just in cyber, but across the board on all vessel operations.
I'd like to jump in on that real quick too. Corey and I have had a number of conversations, and on commercial, regulatory, cybersecurity, it's one way or you're not going to run your business. And on a yacht, I believe what you're going to end up with are two distinct networks, one that's the compliant network for everything there, and the other one that's the owner's network, because he says, it's my vessel, I want to do what I want with it. And I do think you're going to have that dichotomy, and they will end up being handled differently.
How many VPNs do you need on every boat?
It's not. We'll be way past a VPN. It's gonna. Yeah, that's an interesting piece when you look at it. Is the compliance.
Yeah,
and
maritime, you have to do it.
Yeah.
And on a yacht, you have to do it for a piece of it, but not for all of it.
The yachts are kind of third place in the rest of the maritime industry. Unfortunately, as an industry, we get stuck with the regulations that come down that are built really for cargo and cruise. There's a lot of things that are nuanced in the large yacht market that just don't fit into those buckets of what happens in the commercial. Everybody in commercial is soulless. So, ECDIS, we don't care about paper charts. When the Coast Guard and the UKHO have made these announcements, everybody in commercial is like, well, we're already using ECDIS. Paper what? We may have it, but, they're already way ahead of that, where it's different in the nuances of how the large yacht works.
I think we're already in a position where we need to protect the vessel from the guests and the crew. And you mentioned before about the human being the weakest link, which is true. But I think providing you've got defense in depth that would prevent the malware getting onto the ship, or even if the crew do click on the link, to prevent it actually pulling down the payload, etc. I still think there's some merit in having that defense in depth.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I also, when people ask me, I put the crew on the Wild West network. It's not connected to anything. They can infect each other, their devices. It's almost the I don't care network that is not connected to anything critical in the boat and do whatever they want, and you can limit the bandwidth. That's almost an easier solution than saying that, okay, well, we're all on an operational network and, we download something.
Is that what you did to Telemar's network on the building?
No, that's another discussion, David, of what's happened.
Thank you
there.
very much, David. I love that www networks just for the crew.
It's a Wild West network. You
Exactly, that's
can give
what-
each other
yeah.
viruses on it all day long.
I don't know. I mean, that could be taken a lot of different ways, Corey,
Yeah.
but I don't know how many
It's
of you
rated
guys
G,
here know-
Norma. It's rated G.
Well, so
We
far
got to keep
anyway.
the audience awake. It's after lunch, the air conditioner's starting to kick in a little bit.
Thank
We're ahead of
goodness.
the booze hour.
Well,
so.
listen, Matthew Zimmerman from Far Sounder has a question or a comment.
Thank you, Norma. I just wanted to circle back with a comment about the autonomous capabilities coming up in the future. I've been involved in a number of projects with uncrewed vessels, even up to 50 meters in length, and it's clear that this is something that's going to happen, but it's still pretty nascent right now. But today, there's a lot of innovations that I think can be leveraged by the crewed vessels that are coming out of that market. For example, bringing in more sensor type, so you have a better situational awareness of what's out there. You were talking earlier about resurveying the harbors to get an updated information about what's there before you get there. We're doing that with our customers today, and clearly bandwidth to get that information is important, but interoperability and interconnectivity and integration, I think, are keywords for the autonomous world that's really going to help push and improve that in the crewed world as well today. So I guess one question I have is, what types of hurdles do you still see in the integration of these various different systems from your point of view?
I can start to give you guys time to think on this one. And thanks, Matthew, for the question. It is pretty cool, some of the stuff that, that you guys are doing when it comes to the data sharing, and I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg where we're going to go with that. And the types of sensors that we're going to see on vessels, sure, we're going to have the radar and the depth sounder, but I think camera systems and infrared systems and other type of detection systems that we're seeing, pioneered on the smart vehicles today, in some form, some of that technology too is going to come over to the, the vessel side. We're in an interesting place because a smart city is much easier to operate in smart maritime, because in a smart city, I have a whole huge cell phone network that's the backbone of how this can run. But when we get outside of a harbor, on the maritime side, the closest ship to me could be 20 miles. So the tech to move that data is not, a local area network. Sure, some of that will probably port over to data sharing and connectivity. And with that, one of the things that we look at from the cyber perspective is the trust factor. Can I trust the data that's coming from this ship that I don't know? And that's a big piece of research that's been done on the smart city side, is trusting the data sharing from different sensors, different vehicles, because that's how this whole kind of connected city works, is the data sharing between all these pieces and the trust factor. And I think we'll start to see some of that come into the maritime. Can I trust the data from this sensor? Can I trust the data from this boat? Can I trust this? And then it's an automated rating that's done, and I think AI is going to play, and I know we've mentioned that a lot, but welcome to the future. It is AI. It's here to stay, and that's going to play a lot into how I think some of this evolves.
So I think from the Intellian side, what we've done for the different frequencies that you can operate on board, right? So cruise ships, they operate these huge antennas, right? They're 2.4 meter antennas, and they're operating on 3 different frequencies at a time. So what we're doing is we're taking those large antennas and shrinking them down to size that'll fit on the yachts, right? So you'll be able to use KU and KA frequencies at the same time, or flip between the two, depending on what's better for the vessel at that time. And then, like Corey said, what you do is that you then integrate it with OneWeb or Starlink or cellular or all these others, and you manage them down into your network, system that's on board, which then probably goes through whoever your marine electronics or systems integrator is on that end. But we are trying to take those different frequencies, put them into one unit, and provide that for you.
I think that just goes to prove that there's still a lot for the non-AI aspect of yachting to be a part of it. But we've got a question here from Dieter Janegi, the founder of Viking Crew, another link between the commercial and the yachting world. Dieter?
My question really is about e-learning. I see with Mintra you do a lot of e-learning, and I understand what you're saying about the commercial sector, the yacht sector, the cruise sector, but we're finding more and more yachts coming into we operate the largest and most advanced simulator in the world, bridge simulator in the world, in the UK, and we're finding more and more yachts coming in there to work very closely with the cruise ships, because we operate the training for people like Virgin and Scenic Cruises and Windstar, but as I say, do you think e-learning is the real way forward? But because I see people still want to get in a simulator.
Yep. So e-learning is good for certain topics. When it comes to the more complicated, and just like you said, they want to follow suit with the cruises. This is where the simulators come in place, but not your physical simulators. You're going to have the cloud-based simulators that you can develop digital learning with, or you can do the blended, right? What COVID taught us, and I hate to go back, but what COVID taught us is, before COVID, we'll say everybody was pushing e-learning, but what we found during COVID, the blended approach is probably the best way to do it. So this is why we're investing heavily in the augmented virtual reality space. We're investing in cloud-based simulations. The learning management system needs to be able to function for those who cannot make it to the center, so that you could have a blended classroom as well. So you'll have students in the classroom as well as those who cannot make it and they're at home. So it's not just e-learning, it's a learning ecosystem, and we need to make sure from our side that we utilize the technologies that are coming up, because of course we have a different generation of learners that are coming up as well. So I hope that answered your question.
I mean, what I was going to say was we have a virtual reality space,
Yeah.
a Wärtsilä one in our facility, and we find that actually people don't want to use that. They
don't.
They want to go on the real sim because they just don't get the same feeling with it.
Well, so yes, it doesn't replace the actual experience of actually being on board the vessel, but what you can utilize the virtual reality and augmented reality is assessing soft skills, right? Assessing reaction times. If you're utilizing it correctly, you can see exactly if this person is ready to go and practice on an actual vessel, if that makes sense.
We had a question up here, Zach does. I mean, I'll jump down. I don't like to sit for very long.
Oh, I was going to come to Captain Zach Bailey next. I mean, seriously, who doesn't want to get next to Zach? If you guys don't know Zach Bailey, can I tell you something about him? He's had the most amazing career. He was a large yacht captain for almost 20 years, and then he decided that he was going to go re-educate himself, so he went home to Australia, and he's now become a maritime attorney, and he's working with Moore & Co. out of Miami, and so I think he's a great example of a totally different kind of blended learning. Zach?
No hard questions, Zach.
Okay,
No, I'm
thank you.
just
I'll keep it simple.
No, you won't.
Yeah. If we consider now to the next navigation in terms of a bridge, are you considering, and you collectively, the technological sector, the advances, are you considering limitations in terms of responsibility and collision regulations, or are you expecting the legislators or the legal aspect to impose those limits upon you? What are your thoughts?
That's a really good question, and that was a discussion point that we had, before. When AI starts to take this over, and let's get 30, 50 years down the line when AI is driving the ship, and AI crashes, who's responsible for that? And what does that look like? For now, the regulations aren't going to change. The collision, lookouts, everything that's in, the NAV regulations are what they are. And IMO hasn't said anything at this point to say, oh, we're going to make changes to that. But is there potential that could be in the future? yeah, and who's going to do it? I don't know if the IMO is going to be able to stay in front of, some of the regulatory changes. It may be the U.S. Coast Guard, it may be the MCA, it may be other, regulatory bodies that are going to come out and say, okay, if you're going to navigate within our jurisdiction, here's what our regulations are. And that is what could become a huge mess, is if you start to apply different regulatory regimes based on where you are in the world. And then that gets back to the equipment side of it, to the training side of it, is, what does that look like? That was kind of the purpose of the IMO, is to say, okay, we're going to streamline all of this, kind of under one, big world agreement, with little nuances here and there. But if I can sail my boat, in and out of Miami, I should be able to take it to Rotterdam. I should be able to go to, Hamburg, other parts of the world. And so it's going to be interesting to see as this stuff is evolving much faster than the regulatory, and in some cases, the legal piece too.
Indeed, which raises the training issue and the emphasis for new crew, and the understanding that, let's say, Rule 2, that they have the ability or the authority and the autonomy to say, no, let's stop. The systems are saying this, but I'm not comfortable, and have the confidence to stop or to choose an alternate pathway.
And is there a legal issue involved in that?
I think we can leave that, absolutely.
Well, and aviation
Absolutely.
still has that. Aviation still has the crews, the ultimate authority, and what happens with that aircraft to say, no, we're going to override this particular system, to some point. But will we get to the point where we're going to, AI the people out of this?
Well, whether it's a harbour pilot, and if it's mandatory pilotage, you can stand the pilot down for another pilot.
Right.
So the same with AI. It's there, but it needs to be considered as a tool and not the ultimate tool.
Right, absolutely.
Well, yeah, if we're thinking about people as tools, I got another question here from Jim Aladdin, but I have kind of a more generic question for you first. As Zach and I and several people in the room are associated with a large scientific research and exploration group called the International Seakeepers Society, how do you think, do you see that there is a place for navigation and training in that for us to be able to more easily access the places of the world that are in need of oceanographic research and education? Is that something that is on anybody's radar?
That's a training.
I'm sorry.
I'll answer on my opinion. I'm happy to chat.
Sorry,
That's
Norma.
a training. That's
Norma,
training.
I apologize. I missed the first part of what you had asked.
As our yachts are becoming more and more interested in participating in ocean research, conservation, sustainability, which I think is the word of the show,
Yeah.
is that something that is at all a part of your training or a part of your operations? Or do you see any aspect of AI that is going to look at that? Because that's a huge part of the survivability of the yacht world.
So in short, yes, it is on our radar. We do have sustainability trainings, and it already exists. Now, it's how it's implemented on board is the question. So each vessel at the moment, because there's really, and I go back to regulation because in the maritime world, no one does it unless it's a regulation or a standard that's put in place. Each company is handling sustainability in their own way, right? So it's difficult to kind of make a training where it's generalized enough for each company to be able to utilize, or each sector in the industry to utilize. But it is something that we are heavily involved in.
Well, it might only be dictated by legislation in the commercial world, but let me tell you, in the yacht world, it is something that is an absolute choice, and is something that I think most of us consider absolutely crucial, as I said before, to the survivability of our industry, in order for the rest of the world to understand that as yacht people, as yacht owners, as part of the greater circle, that we are in a position to do something to help save the world, and communication is a huge part of that. So I know that was a offbeat question, but literally I believe that sustainability is the word of Monaco Yacht Show 2023. So I think we have to involve that question in everything we do. So
Can I jump in and make an observation? And sustainability, I think, is going to be a big part of shipping across the board. One of the things that I've always thought that the large yacht industry should be the F1 of the global maritime industry. Like the coolest designs and the newest technology, I've always felt should be adopted and started in large yacht and then move the other way. It hasn't been like that, but one of the things that I've seen in the last couple of years is some really innovative technology has been born in the large yacht side and is now looking at potentially moving back up into the commercial sector with cruise lines and cargo lines. So I think it's an interesting shift that's slowly starting to take place because people see now that there's a lot of innovation that you can do in the large yacht industry, and it moves much faster than it does in commercial or cruise. So I think over the next few years we may start to see that shift where the large yacht industry may really become the Formula One of the maritime, industry. And that's something that I know in other panels I've heard people talk about, and it's kind of cool because you actually are starting to see that in some respects. Not across the board, but in some respects you're starting to see that, and a lot in the sustainability side.
I love the way you think always, Corey. If yachting can become the F1 in the development...
Formula One racing, car racing for
yes,
you.
Of course.
I'm an American, it's
anybody
my
doesn't know
favorite
what that
sport,
is.
so sorry.
But I think that's another really interesting intersection between the human factor, which is the desire to do something good with, the largest luxury item in the world, and the realities of technology and what technology can do to help us get there. So your F1 analogy is great.
I
Yes,
think
we know what
people would get
Formula
that
One
because
is.
we're in Monaco, but Formula One car racing.
Okay,
Sorry.
well, when it comes to acronyms, it's probably a good idea to make sure that we flesh all of them out. But Captain Jim Aladdin has a question.
Yes, I'd introduced myself before. Jim Aladdin, I'm actually with a large yacht corp for the moment, ex-captain on Cloudbreak. I was just thinking about something that's been very important for me in my career, and that's on-board training. And it's not regulated, and it's not mandatory, and if it's not mandatory, it does not get done. I mean, we're talking about, I used to use SafeBridge, an amazing platform. You have the type-specific ECTIS, but you chew through that course with, almost multiple choice questions in a day. But then some yacht sits for 11 months in the harbor, and then they go maybe 1 week to the Red Sea and back. And you forget so much. There's no regular training on board to keep the knowledge up. We're all forced to do man overboard, fire, abandon ship, once a month. But okay, yachts are I was lucky on a busy yacht. We went around the world all the time. But some yachts are not busy, and we're talking about human error, we're talking about training, but the on-board bit, which I pushed for, it's not mandatory and doesn't happen a lot, and I think that's very important. And my question really is there anything we should put in regulation that is supposed to be a certain amount of on-board training that will be mandatory, even if it will be like an hour a month for cyber training to not click on that link, or will be retrain on the bridge? And maybe if you navigate a lot, you tick the box. If you don't navigate, you have to do a certain amount of training that can be implemented as a regulation, because that training on board, on your system, on your boat, on a regular basis, for me, is very important.
Yep. So there's a few things that you bring up. It's a very good point. Now, when it comes to onboard training, yes, it's not in regulation, but this is where the competency framework for that company comes in, right? So there's, of course, your required training, and if on the commercial side, and I'm sure the same with on the yachting side, there's a lot of training that needs to be required and needs to be done throughout the year, right? And needs to be refreshed. So a lot of times what companies are saying is that the onboard training, they don't want to facilitate this because when they're on board, they need to work. But that's where you open yourself up to some type of risk, and it's always good to have that on-the-job training, because if something goes wrong, it could be a learning experience for the rest of the crew, right? So if you have that on-the-job training. But again, that's where the competency framework comes into play, right? So it's each company for their own. This is what I want my crew to look like.
Dieter has another comment.
I was going to say, you were saying about the superyacht industry being in the front. I think we've got to look at the new boutique expedition cruise ships. They really do it well. I mean, that's the crossover from yachting into cruise yachting. And if you look at someone like Scenic, who operates submarines and 2 helicopters, we have a really strong training alliance with them, and they're coming back to what the gentleman over there was saying, is get the people in the simulator. And what we do beyond compliance. So we work very closely, as I say, with the cruise lines and with people like Scenic and the smaller boutique cruise ships. And I'm saying that because Norma knows, I went to sea in 1967, so a long time ago. So I've been in the industry a few years, and I've seen it change. And we've talked a lot about these things, and what's coming and what you guys on that podium are talking about is coming very quickly, very, very quickly, and I think we have to better understand that. But let's not forget that we're talking about people, and our industry is about people and training them to deliver a quality product to our clients here, whether it's on a super yacht or whether it's on a cargo ship or on a cruise ship. So we mustn't forget them, and we talk about AI, but I don't believe that we're going to see, in my lifetime, autonomous ships. There may be ships that have one officer on board, and we're down to a very minimum crew, but I don't think we're going to see them. And I think, with the amount of technology going on, we have to be very conscious of the things that may happen in what goes on. That's what I'm going to say. Thanks.
So if I can just say one thing, and I can't speak too much to ECDIS and the training on that end, but I know from the Intellian side, we do offer training on our systems that through any of our partners, that if you're, purchase equipment or anything through them, you can get training on our systems. In addition, I know that a lot of our partners are starting to do this where they're training ETOs, they're training people on board, and they're putting up classrooms all over, right? From Barcelona, here in Monaco, even stateside. I know it's the VSAT antenna, no one really wants to talk about it. It can be a snooze fest, but there are opportunities for crew to do that. I think it's just putting the time, getting them in place, and putting something together for a course. But if anyone does have questions, I'm happy to help on that.
Well, we're talking about the human aspect here, and I'd like to introduce you to another fantastic human, Captain Kelly Gordon. And I think, as always, that she probably has an expert opinion because her specialty is literally the deep dive into the psyche of her crew and the industry.
You were mentioning how training your crew would look ultimately. How do you want your vessel to look ultimately? How do you want your company to look? That's true to an extent, but unless you somewhat regulate and say, no, this has to be done. I know I've worked on super busy vessels that was all about jamming 20 charters a year down our throat. How much time do you think I had to do for certain things? But if it was regulated, then he being that owner has no choice then other than to give us that time to properly train.
So are you for it or against it?
For regulating training, I think that there could stand to be some sort of regulating and training because I'm an educator before I'm a yacht captain. And so you're speaking my complete language about today's learner and learning styles and everything like that. And I love to teach and I love to train. As much as I love that, and it was a former profession of mine, when I'm jamming out 20 weeks of charter a year, I could use the support of having some sort of regulation behind me to say, no, in fact, we can't jam out these 20 charters a year because we actually need to stop and do some training. Because on that vessel, asking to go train or take a class wasn't going to happen.
And I completely agree with you, and I'm glad this is the type of approach that you do take. Yes, having regulatory training is always a plus, and thank you for letting me know. It would make certain aspects of your job easier, and you would have that time to actually train. Unfortunately, the reality is not everyone thinks the same way, right? So, yes, I could push for regulation for training. You can push for regulation and training, but there's always those other companies that are saying, no, we don't have that time, and they give that pushback. So until there's this consensus where we can kind of regulate this area for you, then yes, I completely agree with you.
But that was my last vessel. The vessel that I'm on now, which obviously, the last one was a fit to an extent, but I had to move on because it wasn't aligning with my values and leadership and training, and I'm on a vessel now who said, you're going to the Monaco Yacht Show, right? And are there any classes or training that you're going to do while you're there? If so, you should stay longer.
Oh, wow.
So now so it does go back to what you're saying. There is this, the other flip side of it is don't regulate it. Let just the owners and the crew's morals and sense of pride in the way you want your vessel to be run allow for that training. So that there's two sides to the coin.
I don't think there's too many people in this business that think we need more regulation in regarding to exactly how much training, because unfortunately, it's the reality in our industry is that a lot of people have to really compromise their careers in order to actually fit in the time. And you're very, very fortunate, Kelly, to be on a vessel where the owner encourages you and your crew to take the time, not only in what is regulated, necessary training, which takes several weeks a year potentially, not to mention all the other things. And so that's why we're always extremely happy to have you here. And I'd like to give a great shout out to Captain Kelly Gordon and her entire team. We are actually filming and photographing this seminar and our next seminar that's coming up. And so they have volunteered to do that for us as a service for ISS. So I'd like everybody to say a big thank you to Captain Kelly Gordon, please. Do we have any more questions, comments? Oh, here we go.
Hi, Kelly Malin Beasley. We're touching on training and regulation. Do you think that the lack of public events involving technology and digital technology means that the regulation is not forthcoming, or that the security is such that the events aren't happening?
So that's a great question, Kelly. Thank you for asking that. I believe that we're probably one major event away from, from a cyber perspective of we're one major event away from, something catastrophic happening. What's happening in the cyberspace is mind-blowing. Before it was, outside of state actors. It was, my 14-year-old nephew in the basement trying to, hack into stuff. And now it's, groups of people that are actually corporations with HR and with management and with, all these other pieces, operating around the world. And we've been kind of outside of that, that kind of attack side of it, but I see that as changing, and it's going to change pretty rapidly. And I think it's unfortunate that incidents typically beget regulation. We don't ever see, or very rarely see, regulation come before an incident happens. So I think if we start to see more cyber incidents, I know in the United States, the U.S. Coast Guard has a slew of regulations that they're considering for cyber, and specifically for vessels coming in and out of the United States. What gets through, what happens with that will remain to be seen. But if there's, major attacks on vessels, we're going to see that change. Just like what happened, when you look at the ISPS and the MTSA and all that stuff that happened after September 11th, we kind of thought, oh, security, okay, whatever. And then there's a terrorist attack, and now we have a slew of regulations, that have come in. And I think the same will happen, specifically from my perspective, on the cyber. I don't know if you guys want to.
So what do you think that AI is going to be able to help us prevent those types of actions, Corey?
In some respects, yes, but we're still a long way away from, what's a long way, but we're still a ways away from, that being able to take place. We need to put the basic protection in place on board the vessel, how we, do endpoint protection, how we look at managing our networks and firewalls, and then how we back data up to be able to bring critical systems back online. There's still, I think, a lot that needs to be done, kind of ahead of AI. And AI, I don't think for a while at least, is going to be the whole holy grail. There's no one thing that you can point at from a cyber perspective and say, okay, here's what you need to do, and now you've closed the front door. There's multiple things that you need to do, to be able to look at the detection and monitoring all the way through the recovery. And from a vessel or a company standpoint, what are you doing? Because when we've seen major attacks on the commercial side of it, and I won't mention this company by name, but one of the largest shipping companies in the world was attacked. It took them almost a year to get back into, normal operations. So now people look at, okay, it's different on how we look at data backup and recovery because these incidents are real. I don't know of very many companies that operate in our space that have not been a victim to some form of cyber attack. There's not one company that I know of that hasn't experienced something in some way, shape, or form.
Well, I'd be very interested to hear the stories that actually come out of the yacht world. I've asked some of the attorneys in the room and some other people, if they know of any incidents where yachts have been hijacked, and so far the answer is, oh no, of course, we've never seen anything like that.
And what we mentioned at the beginning is, the probability, yes, is there to be able to do it, but the likelihood of that happening it's not likely. What's more likely is that you corrupt the navigation data that's going into these systems. That's probably more likely, or even to take the system hostage or ransom, to be able to say, hey, we've launched ransomware into your navigation system and now we control it and you can't go anywhere until you pay us. Or if you have this, the backup system's ready to bring online. But there's a lot that needs to be done, again, in my opinion, when it comes to the protection. One of the most interesting things that I've seen, though, is major maritime incidents, not necessarily in large yachts, but major maritime incidents around the world. One component of that investigation now is cyber. And, 5 to 7 years ago, you didn't see that. So when you see a major maritime incident, now you see cyber forensic experts that are part of that post-incident investigation. So it's something that I know governments are really looking at to say, was this a cyber incident?
Well, again, I think we are going to see, despite the influence of AI, I think we're going to see more of those types of incidents filter down to the yacht world. But David's got another question. Andy.
It's like David, but different. Going on to this cyber, there's a Dutch academic researcher that's created a website, and what they're doing is gathering all the different cyber attacks to do with maritime. And I can't remember the URL to share with you, but I will try and get it. But it's really fascinating. There's dozens of different cyber attacks that are useful, certainly for us, to sort of say to people, these are the sort of things that's happening from the Russians spoofing GPS through to phishing emails. It's really quite interesting. I'll try and get that.
Yeah, there's a couple of, I know there's a university that we work with in the UK that's doing a lot of research on specifically attacks in the maritime, and we've seen GPS spoofing for a number of years now. That's not, something that's brand new. We've seen it quite a bit in different parts of the world, and before the Russia-Ukraine conflict spooled up, we saw GPS spoofing in those areas. It's very, very prevalent ahead of that. So it's interesting to see the different potential. And when you look at GPS is actually very easy to spoof. AIS is very easy to spoof. Those systems have very little, if no, security whatsoever, and so it's very easy to spoof those systems locally. A lot more difficult on the satellite side, but the local side, I can spend $200 in about 2 hours, and I can spoof all the GPS in Fort Lauderdale, for instance, or here at Monaco pretty easily.
Well, I mean, really, Corey, you had to wait till the end of the presentation to come up with fun words like spoofing. Do we have any more questions out of the audience? Listen, do we have any more comments on our fantastic panel here? I'd like to thank everybody for participating with us today, Intellian and Telemar and Dryad Global and our newest yachties, Mintra. And on behalf of the International Superyacht Society and our Education Committee, I'd really like to thank all of you guys for participating in the leadership series today. I urge you to stay for our next presentation, which is called The Rising Tide of Mergers and Acquisitions in Yachting. We have an absolutely amazing panel. It's going to be chaired by the fantastic Bob Saxon. So you'll have a lot to learn. So I know all these guys are staying, and I hope all the rest of you will also. And again, join us tonight upstairs at the pool deck. You have to go through the side entrance to get there for our members' reception if you want to rub elbows with the luminaries of yachting. So thank you very much for being here.